Joining us now, former Michigan Congressman and former Reagan Budget Director David Stockman. He's the author of the new book, The Great Deformation, The Corruption of Capitalism in America. And I'm daunted by it. Tell me who you leave out in this book as not sort of a part of our Great Deformation.
Well, actually, I've listed about 20 people who have done great things, starting with Carter Glass, who created the Fed, Eisenhower, who finally balanced the budget and dramatically cut defense, working through Paul Volcker, who was the greatest central banker we ever had, Bill Clinton, I give credit for balancing the budget, and Sheila Bair, which may not be a well-known name, but
it's known to us.
Sheila Bair, who was the only one willing to stand up to the madness of the September 2008 panic. I call it the BlackBerry panic.
Yeah.
Because she actually knew something about the banking system and how to separate the problem, and instead you let the Wall Street gang that was running the Treasury under Paulson and Tim Geithner running around New York in behalf of all the banks run the show, and I think they did very bad things. That was a turning point in American history. When we bailed out Wall Street, that was the end of capitalism. When we bailed out Wall Street, that was the end of fiscal rectitude in America. I don't think we can turn around from where we are.
And I don't think people have given proper credence to the to what Sheila Bair did, what she had the fortitude to do, to speak out, given everything that you're describing, and the years and years and years of men, running the place and running it into the ground.
It's always men around.
Well, it's okay. It's always men, and especially when it's incompetent men, and I don't mind saying this morning, but here's Sheila Bair, had been in the financial system, in policy positions for decades, knew what she was talking about at the FDIC, great staff, great information, and they have a guy over at the Treasury, Neil Kashkari, running everything, shoved her out of the way. Who's Neil Kashkari? He was a space telescope engineer from California who had some small-time job in the San Francisco office of Goldman Sachs. Paulson went to the Treasury, took volunteers. He came along. The next thing we know, he's the czar. The space telescope engineer is the czar of the financial markets in America, and Sheila Bair has got her nose on the glass looking in. Now, this is
let me ask
a
you,
measure of the distortion.
Wait, let's see. What was the alternative? What was the alternative to the bailouts? I opposed the bailouts, first of all, because I thought you don't give banks $700 billion with 3 pages that can obviously be used anyway to justify anything. But what was the alternative at that time?
The normal bankruptcy machinery, because the meltdown was entirely within the canyons of Wall Street.
But we're told if you went through the normal procedures of bankruptcy and actually let free markets be free, then suddenly people would show up, their ATM machines wouldn't work, there'd be riots in the street, locusts would come down from the heavens.
That's why this weighs so much, okay?
Yeah. So explain what would have happened if President Bush would have said, and Congress would have said, you know what, they made reckless decisions over the past decade. They're going to have to pay in the free marketplace for those reckless decisions.
Okay, it started with AIG. AIG was not a contagious economic disease. You could have taken the holding company to the bankruptcy court. That's where all the bad paper was written, the so-called CDS, credit default swaps. If you went to bankruptcy, the 20 big banks of the world would have lost 40, 50 billion. Those 20 big banks who bought that insurance from the holding company of AIG had balance sheets of 20 trillion. So you're talking about a 1% hit. It could have happened. Barclays, Societe Generale, JP Morgan, Bank America, the rest of them. That's the first point. So AIG was not a contagion. The next two in line, Goldman and Morgan Stanley, were heavily funded with hot wholesale money, repo, commercial paper. They could have gone down and reorganized, and the pieces and parts and talent that came out of there would have, lived for another day to put out a shingle and become an M&A shop.
Again, let the market do what the market's done for 200 years.
The third thing that I think is important, no ATM would have gone dark, no payroll wouldn't have been met, because the Main Street banks didn't own these toxic securities, the CDS, the CDOs. Those were all in the balance sheets of these big hedge funds parading as investment banks in Wall Street. So I lay lay out in here in great detail that Main Street banks were safe. The money market fund, you heard all about that. It was going to go down, the money market funds. Actually, they were $3.8 trillion in size, and the only thing that left the money market industry was $60 billion, a couple percent. What really happened is money went from one account to another, from so-called prime accounts to government accounts. That's the only thing that happened. So no user would have lost money. But why was this such a big stink? Because when it went out of the prime accounts that could own commercial paper, all of a sudden General Electric couldn't easily fund its commercial paper. Guess what? Its interest rates went up like it's supposed to on the free market. Guess what? Crony capitalist Jeff Immelt calls up Paulson and says, I'm in trouble here. My interest rates are going up. Do something. They froze the commercial paper market. By the way,
crony capitalist Jeff Immelt. Good friend of mine. Go ahead.
Yes, I understand, but I'm an equal opportunity.
The great thing about David's book is there's something in it to disappoint everybody.
You know, but wait a minute. Let's be clear about this. They froze a Republican administration, the Treasury, Paulson, froze and nationalized the commercial paper market right there within hours of the call between Immelt and Paulson. And therefore, they were able to continue to use commercial paper.
So, Harold, let me go to Harold Ford here.
So, I hear, but in all fairness, Director Stockman, if you take the opposite view and you look at what's happened in Europe and how they have struggled with their banks over the last 12 to 24 months, we talk about a bailout. The reality also is that these banks paid back all of the money, and there was an interest. There was an interest. The American people, the government made money on it. It was an unusual way to make a profit, but there was a profit made. There are those that would take the complete opposite view of yours, that indeed the pedestrian investor and the pedestrian American would have been affected in a more harmful way than perhaps you pontificate this morning. How do you counter that? I understand your point about the size of the balance sheets and the comparative hit, how small that comparative hit may be, but could that trickle-down effect not have been bigger and larger than perhaps you suggest in the book?
No, I think to the contrary, the average American saver has been totally destroyed as a result of Bernanke's policy to drive interest rates to zero. And the banks were able to pay back their TARP only because the Fed has crushed interest rates for savers. Let's say on CDs you get 40 basis points today, and therefore they have earned an artificial Fed gifted spread of tens of billions a quarter, which they then used to rebuild their equity and pay back their TARP. So the TARP was paid back out of the hides of fixed income, retired Americans and savers. It's a fiscal policy of enormous import. If you put that up for a vote in Congress, let's crush all the middle-class savers. Let's deny them even a cent, hardly, from their hard-earned savings so that we can transfer it to the banks so they can get better and claim that TARP worked.
But was it not a fiction in some ways, all the things that, don't get me wrong, I don't think there's a lot to go around here. I just take the opposite view for a moment. But can an argument be made that we found ourselves in a challenge? We found ourselves because people believed in the fiction and they thought they had more than what they actually had, because housing prices were probably overvalued. The market may have been overvalued. In some ways, if you look at where we are from where the crisis, 4 years later, the market has returned. We're now at record highs.
Guys, we're going to have to wrap this up. So go ahead.
I'm just taking the opposite view.
Wrap it up really quickly. Go ahead.
Yes. 4 years later, we lost 6 million middle-class full-time jobs. We got 1 million back, 15% recovery. 4 years later, the stock market is recovered 115%, all of it back. Why? Because the two are divorced. The real economy is failing. It's in trouble. The Fed is just inflating a third bubble by this zero interest policy and by this insane purchase of $85 billion of government debt a month, telling Washington, don't do anything about the deficit, go out, have a party, bury yourself in debt. The policy today is if you hate your children, you'll love what Washington is doing because they're burying them in debt.
Put that on a bumper sticker.
The book is The Great Deformation, the Corruption of Capitalism in America. David Stockman, thank you very
David.
much.
Yes.
Tina, thank you as well.
It is scary.
Still ahead on Morning Joe. What can baseball teach us about God? New York University President John Sexton will be here with his provocative new book. We'll be right back.